everyone, and welcome to the iView World 2020 Film Festival. I'm Jitin Hingorani. I'm the founder and festivals director of the New York City South Asian Film Festival and the DFW South Asian Film Festival. And we actually are partnering with Engendered for the first time this year. So we're very excited about this merger, and we are going to welcome you all to Vital Voices, which is a series of panel discussions that we're having after the incredible screenings of human rights programming at this festival. We have 53 films, 4 physical events, and the rest of it is all virtual. We hope you're enjoying it thus far. And we have a phenomenal panel for you today that I want to introduce. First of all, we have the moderator of the panel, Viveck Vaswani, who is a dear friend of both festivals. In fact, he's on the board of one of them and on the jury of another. He's also the Dean of Contemporary Media for Pearl Academy. So Viveck is also a veteran of the Indian film industry as a producer, director, and actor. And he also launched Shah Rukh Khan's career. That's what he is most known for in the industry as well. So Viveck, first of all, welcome to iView and welcome to this festival.
Thank you, Jitin. I'm looking forward.
Good. Next, we have with us the lovely Vibha Bakshi, who is a journalist, a filmmaker, a 4-time National Award winner, just a dynamic woman. And every film I see of hers just moves me in so many ways. We have her fabulous film Sunrise as part of our festival this year, which deals with gender inequality and female infanticide. Just a phenomenal film following her Daughters of Mother India, both of which have won national awards. Vibha, welcome to iView.
Thank you so much. Very excited and honored to showcase at the festival.
And last but not least, we have the dynamic Dylan Mohan Gray, who has also been a festival family member. We've shown his films Fire in the Blood. He just did Bad Boy Billionaires on Netflix, the Vijay Mallya story. And now we have his amazing documentary From Tomorrow to Durban here in our festival as well. Dylan, welcome.
Thank you very much, Jitin. Great to be here.
Great. I want to start, Vibha, with you because I launch into a question and then I'm going to hand it over to Viveck. We've talked extensively about this film and most people have seen it now. What was the impetus for you to go out there and make this film and deal with the villages of India and such a tough situation and a topic where you were the only female in so many of these situations? What motivated you to tell this story?
Jitin, I was screening my previous film, Daughters of Mother India, which put the spotlight on rape and gender violence. And we had begun screening across the police force in India. So we had screened for over 150,000 police officers, and we had reached now Haryana. We were screening for the police in Haryana, and this is where an activist came up to me and said, there is a farmer who in an arranged marriage has married a gang rape survivor. I was happily stunned because I did not expect a man from Haryana in an arranged marriage to have, taken the step to marry a gang rape survivor. The activist did not have the farmer's name or the village, but with the help of the police, the team and I entered the hinterlands of Haryana and we found the farmer. People were ridiculing him for his decision, but when I met Jitinder Chattar, I said, we have found our hero, and this is how Sunrise was born, and this is what took me to Haryana.
Wonderful. We're definitely going to continue that story. Dylan, I want to ask you a similar question. Fire in the Blood, dealing with AIDS medication and the disparity there, to this film that is really more global and tells the story of just a series of violations of human rights. What was it that prompted you to go after this kind of a global specter here?
The genesis of this film was a lot of conversations that I was having with some of the key NGOs who work in the space of global health, many of whom had become partners during the process of making and releasing Fire in the Blood. And, had with some of these organizations had very, very positive experiences and really found myself to be very much on a wavelength with them. And, a couple of these NGOs had come back to me and said, we feel like there's a great deal of despondency in the global health community currently, because in part due to the sort of rise of right-wing populism throughout the world, obviously epitomized first and foremost by Donald Trump, who hopefully will be out of the White House very soon. But also, your Putins, your Modis, all these people, have rolled back a lot of the gains that have been perceived to have been made during recent times, during the last, in specific with regard to global health. I mean, as Fire in the Blood sort of detailed, the HIV/AIDS movement was really critical in sort of expanding the conversation about global health and really underlining the idea of a basic right to health as a basic human right. And so there had been, a lot of kind of positivity and even euphoria about all the things that had happened post this, sort of seminal conference, that International AIDS Conference that happened in Durban in the year 2000. And then in recent times, let's say in the last 4 years, a lot of those gains have suddenly been rolled back. And a lot of the discourse and social discourse in many, many countries, and in, I would say, all parts of the world, has started to be very reactionary, very much sort of turning against the idea of human rights and health. And so many of the people who have been, drawn into this movement started to feel like, okay, we're no longer moving forward, now we're moving backwards. Then they start to question their own role in it. They're not making a lot of money. Everybody's doing this for reasons of humanity, and it comes from the heart. And at some point they had to start to question, like, why am I doing this? What are we doing here? What's the future hold? And so the idea of the film was really knowing that the International AIDS Conference was returning to Durban. Was that we have talked to people in different parts of the world who of this conversation and hear what they have to say about their work, and then kind of engender a conversation about what the future might hold and a path forward to sort of reconnect with the idea of a rights-based approach to human to global health.
Vivek, you've seen both of these films actually very recently. You just finished both of them, and you found, as you mentioned to me, a lot of similarities between these films. Why don't you talk a little bit about, what your perspective was when you watched both of these films side by side?
So when you put both these films together into one panel with Dylan and Vibha, of course, I was very happy because Dylan and me have shared some marvelous experiences on your Dallas Film Festival in Washington, buried in snow, so to speak.
And also Dallas, I hope, not just Washington.
Yeah. But I did see, and I was mesmerized by sitting and watching Fire in the Blood in an auditorium on a big screen. I don't normally get to see documentaries on the big screen. The first thing I thought when I saw both the films back to back last night to refresh myself is, what is this about? And I realized that finally both these films had a very big common thread running through. That thread is summarized in one word: discrimination. Vibha's film is about discriminating. It is about discriminating against women. It is about discriminating against the girl child. It is about discriminating because of caste and gender and etc. And Dylan's film is about discriminating very simply in the first sentence. There are some people who get the medicine, and there are some people who don't get the medicine. The rich and the privileged get the medicine, and in fact, he says, the medicine is where the disease is not. And that hit home very hard for me. And I realized that what Dylan was doing was actually trying to make sure that he bridged that discrimination through his documentaries so that it was available to everyone in the world at the lowest price possible. And Vibha was doing the same thing. Her documentary fought against discrimination through the eyes of a man who actually married a rape survivor and said in the last scene, I will sell my land if necessary to see that she gets justice. And then it took me back to a conversation that I had. It was not a conversation, it was an argument with a stupid bigot who lives in my building. Unfortunately, we're stuck with everyone who lives in our building because of COVID. And he said, there is going to be a Hindu Rashtra in the future. And you know, we have suffered 400 years of oppression, and he went on. And the first thing that struck me is when he said, we are going to be a Hindu Rashtra, there was no joy in his voice. If it is something we're all looking forward to eagerly, then we should be joyful about it. It should be something that is going to take us, our country, our children, our girl child forward. So it's not a threat to me that we are becoming a Hindu Rashtra. I am a Hindu. But the way you said it so menacingly, it's almost as if we'll show you by becoming a Hindu Rashtra. What are you going to show me? You were not oppressed by anyone because of any other reason, but because you practice sati, you practiced child marriage, you practiced dowry, you practiced killing the girl child, you practiced have versus have not, you practiced caste system, you practiced untouchability. You are going to be oppressed even in the future, even if you're a Hindu nation. And I'm sorry to be so vocal about it, but I think these are the roots from which gender inequality, wealth inequality, and all other inequalities have sprung up and become into this huge weed that is choking us. And somewhere it is people like Vibha and Dylan who've raised their voice and said, so it could be about HIV in South Africa, and it could be about Khap Panchayats in Haryana. The point is you're fighting against discrimination. You're fighting for everyone to understand finally what is basic and what are basic rights, what are basic human rights. You're fighting a very, very big virus. It makes COVID look like a kindergarten child, what you are fighting. So I want to start this conversation with you, Vibha, and you, Dylan, saying that did you, like me, get indignant about what is happening, which is why you went ahead? What was your purpose? And I'm not asking about your films, we'll come to those. Vibha, I'll start with you, ladies first. What was your big motivation in actually becoming a documentary filmmaker? What was it that you felt when you said, I'm going to now do? I've had conversations with Dylan about these, and I've been very impressed. So I will talk to Dylan with that knowledge. But since we've never met, I want to start with you telling me why you became a documentary filmmaker, and are you happy with where you've reached so that we can continue forward?
I mean, Vivek, I completely agree with what you said, and it's amazing to see the similarity between two films which are dealing with such different subjects, and yet it really comes down to that discrimination, that inequality. There are fabulous documentary filmmakers here. We all are searching for some, I think we're all searching for answers, and we are struggling. The struggle is on every day. I've had amazing conversations with Dylan on the whole process and how do you get it out there. So leaving all that, I think it's that quest. It's the quest for truth. And when you go in on a journey with a documentary, I don't think there is any defined path. I mean, for example, with Sunrise, I did not go in search of making a film on female infanticide. I did not. But when I reached Haryana, and when I went from village to village and I saw that there were no girls in the village, I mean, the film opens with Teri Behan Hai, Teri Behan Hai. Everywhere that I went, I could not see the girls. And that eerie absence of girls in thousands of villages is when the entire track changed. Even though we had found our hero, we had found our farmer, it really came down to, wait, there is a deeper problem. And when we started digging in, what we realized is that this bias, for the son, the whole thing about starting with the killing of the girls, what it led to now, this population of men who are unable to find brides. Then it led us to search on the whole bride trafficking that was happening. So one thing led to another. That bias led to an eerie absence of girls, which led to bride trafficking. And finally, the kind of violence that is there. Unfortunately, it's one of the states that has the highest number of gang rapes in the country. But you see how you played God and what the consequences are, and everybody is suffering right now. And so I think it's, again, coming down to being a documentary filmmaker. you search, you put the story out there, and then, it is ultimately the decision of the viewer, on how it is embraced, how it's taken on. For all of us, it's about impact. You make a film and you want to see that impact on the ground. And I am most grateful that the journey, although very tough during the filming, when we see today Sunrise being screened across schools nationwide in the country to, break the conspiracy of silence. Screenings have begun amongst the Cup Panchayat, which Viveck, you and I were discussing. I mean, it is one of the hardest things that I've done, and as a woman filmmaker, to question the patriarchs. But today, to see them screen the film across the villages, these are the victories that we're having. Police in Haryana have begun screening Sunrise. So at the end of the day, it's one step at a time, but you really hope to see the impact on the ground.
True. Dylan, you, on the other hand, jumped into the fray with your first film, Fire in the Blood. But the aspect that you chose was not the panic that HIV created, not the stigma that HIV created, not the sheer mass spread of HIV, but in Fire in the Blood, you told us that there was a cure, there was a medicine, but it was inaccessible to people who couldn't afford it because they had highly priced it and they had converted it into a business, the big companies. And there was one company that actually defied everyone and found this one vaccine or medicine, which was accessible, affordable to the lowest of the low, and they started doing it. It was an eye-opener to me that disease can also be a great way to make money. You've actually followed up on this with From Durban to Tomorrow. It's almost as if you've made a sequel saying this is what happened and this is what we are still coping. And the answer to that is what you said in the beginning. We've lost many of the gains that we did in the last few years. But in all fairness, what was the starting point of the journey for you? I'm sure you didn't have relatives in Puerto Rico or South Africa who were suffering from it. You actually went to figure it out.
Yeah, I mean, actually, Fire in the Blood was not something that I looked at as a documentary project. It was just something that sort of, I became aware of the story and became fascinated by the story. And through lucky happenstance, had access to certain people who were part of it. When I started, I come from my academic background is in history. And so before I got sort of waylaid into film, I was following the path to become a history professor and do my PhD in history. And I've seen many times, in my own work that there are lots of important episodes in history that have been essentially lost to the public consciousness because they were not properly documented. And this was clearly evident to me that this story was one of those, because when I started looking for more information about it, there was very little available. There were just sort of very sort of superficial contemporaneous news reports. There was no book, there was no film on the subject. When you think of something that killed double the number of people as the Holocaust, it was incredible to me. It actually came from a place of indignation and anger, both as somebody who considers themselves to be a relatively well-informed member of the public. Why don't I know about this? Why haven't I heard more about this? Why aren't we talking about this? And also seeing that it was very likely to happen again, which is the inevitable consequence when people don't take the lessons of history. So, for me, it was never about AIDS. It was very much about, as you said, human rights, as you said, discrimination, racism. It was about, how we treat each other as human beings, as a global community, and, both within countries and, between countries, between continents, and also how, which we're seeing now with the whole COVID situation, the great peril of entrusting public health to for-profit companies, which have a very different agenda than the public interest. In fact, their agenda in most ways is completely antithetical to the public interest. And until we recognize that, there's going to be tragedy after tragedy, Holocaust after Holocaust. And I'm sure we will see that now in the coming 1 or 2 years as, all the politics around treatments and vaccines for COVID also play out in this way. So, that was really I would say, the heart of the idea. And, you know, I was ill prepared to make a documentary, but, you know, and I wasn't inclined to make a documentary. I wasn't part of the documentary community. Didn't have the tools in my toolbox, but it just seemed that that was the only way to tell the story properly. So I tried to entice some filmmakers to make the film, and they were like, "This is going to take 5 years." So in the end, I had to do it. You know, I had to find a way to do it. So you know, and it was stressful in the sense that, you know, there was a great weight of responsibility I felt to not mess it up, because you know, the story was so important, and it really actually speaks for itself. You don't need to be a particularly great filmmaker to tell it. It's just don't mess it up, you know, because there's such a huge weight of responsibility there.
Oh, and Dylan, the outcome was so powerful and so impactful. Absolutely love your films. Really love it.
Both of you, it's a question. Why did you think that the documentary was the right way to reach the maximum amount of people? Because especially in India, people don't watch documentaries. Documentaries have a very bad name because there was a company, government organization called Films Division that used to churn out 3-minute, 5-minute, 8-minute, boring, black and white, badly shot stuff, but it was compulsory to see it before your feature film. So we didn't want to see documentaries. Of course, today, with certain channels specializing in documentaries, for example, the History Channel, the National Geographic, and so on and so forth, the documentary has found its place in the sun globally, but is still on a backward thing in India. Supposing you had made it as a feature film with all these things, would it have got a bigger audience? Maybe, but it may not have had as much of an impact as a documentary does. How do you take the narrative forward now? Because you've left us with Sunrise, where Jitendra has said, I am going to go forward and I'm going to win and I'm going to get justice for my wife. A lot of us who've seen it now want to follow his story and we want to know what is the final culmination. And a lot of us may want to help him as well. How do we do that?
Vivek, you very rightly said, you know, what would happen if Sunrise, you know, was a feature film? And honestly, a lot of companies, production houses came up and said, let's convert this into a film because it has all the ingredients to be a feature film. You know, here you have a man who's, you know, fighting for his wife's justice. There are 8 rapists who have done everything, you know, to break the system. And the death threats, and then the Cup Panchayat, and there was everything in it. But I think what you rightly said is, with a documentary, the impact has been very different. You know that there is no script here. You know, these are ordinary men who have taken on the extraordinary fight, you know, to change the narrative. So I think the impact would have been different. But I think if this were a feature film, I think the reach would have been much wider. But I think what happens with a documentary, you know, crowdfunding has started for the farmer. You know, as the death threats escalated, you know, they threatened us, they threatened to throw acid on his wife, everything we have seen happen in the film. But I think when you see the crowds rallying, when people have started supporting Jitendra Chattar and you see the fight getting stronger, it's just a very different feel. And we will see that his fight continues. People will make sure that he does not lose the fight, how much ever they try on the other end.
Okay, so I want to go into who's the they, because if everyone knows who the they are, what is stopping these they from just being picked up and thrown out into jail? Or because I know a lot of them came back, but that's because
I mean, the files are missing. We've seen everything in this film. We've seen files disappear. She lost the case in lower court after identifying each of the rapists. And they brutally raped her for a period of 1.5 years. And today the files are missing. The system has been bought out on every level. And I mean, and the saddest part is that instead of the people who have committed this heinous crime, instead of them hiding in shame, it was our warrior, Kusum, who was hiding. But I think the bravest thing that she has done is when she unveiled in the film, you know, she walked in one day after we were filming for months, and she walked into the room and said, the shame is not mine. It belongs to those who have committed it. And I think that completely changed the whole, the whole focus of Sunrise, which is what we have to do. And I think that's why it was also taken by the UN, because it's very, very important to put the shame where it belongs. And today, she is fighting from the front.
It has reached the UN, has it?
Yes, in fact, the UN has taken it, and Sunrise is now being showcased as part of United Nations Global He for She movement across 71 countries.
Super. I think this is a great thing to applaud. Dylan, after Fire in the Blood, you did Bad Boy Billionaires, you did the Vijay Mallya episode, etc. And then you came back from Durban to Tomorrow, going back to the same battle that you started with Fire in the Blood. And it's very clearly that people are being discriminated against. Some of them are not getting the medicine. And one of your people in the documentary actually said, it isn't my fault that I got the HIV, this thing. It was certain situations, it was society, it was because of certain things that happened that I got AIDS. So what happens after this? You've been making the documentaries, the right people are aware, but finally, where do you think the fight is going to go? Because you've already given me a hint by saying that if it is for-profit companies that are going to take the fight forward, then they're not fighting for life, humanity, or human rights. They're fighting for profit. As long as they get their profit, they don't care how many people live, how many people die, how many people get the medicine, how many people don't get the medicine. So in a larger context, Dylan, you've brought us face to face with a massive problem, and I don't know what the answer should be. So the question I'm asking, though it sounds very convoluted, is, in an ideal world, if everything had been perfect, what would have been the solution? Governments getting together, companies getting together and voluntarily shedding a certain amount of profit. What would have been the ideal solution to get people well, come what may?
Well, I think if you're talking about HIV, the solution was very evident, in the sense that in certain countries like India, for example, Thailand, Brazil, there were accommodations made to make sure that medicine would be affordably available to the poor in the country who had HIV. And that was, in India's case, it was due to the patent laws that I detail in Fire in the Blood, that had been specifically put in place when Indira Gandhi was Prime Minister, in order to make medicine accessible to Indians. And that was a revolutionary thing. And similarly, what you had in Thailand and Brazil is the government stepping into the breach and providing government manufacture, overriding in certain cases patent exclusivities, to make sure that the public interest is served by ensuring that people who could never ever afford the patented medicines did not have to die because they were poor. The thing that made it remarkable in the case of India and Indian companies, and certainly Cipla was the leader of that, but there were others as well, is that the way it was set up in India was that the government manufacturer wasn't the lead. It was private manufacture that was enabled by the regulatory framework in India. And the reason that's important is because whereas the Thai medicine that we see in Fire in the Blood being smuggled from Thailand to South Africa, and the Brazilian medication could actually not be sold in other countries because they had a government mandate to serve the public interest in those specific countries. Because the private sector wasn't doing it in India, there was a possibility, at least theoretically, for those medicines to be exported to other countries. And obviously, the HIV burden in India was so high in absolute terms because the population of India is great, of course. But overall, the HIV burden in India was just a very small fraction of the world HIV burden. So the need was elsewhere primarily, and first and foremost in Central and Southern Africa, and that was the thing that it clearly needed to be done. Now, for many years, as we detailed in the film, there were lots of impediments put in place stopping that from happening, even though it meant no extra revenue to the drug companies whatsoever. They weren't losing a single customer. But that's not the mindset with which they operate. The danger for them was, which proved to be false, by the way, was that people in countries like the United States would see medication reaching patients in very poor countries for, let's say, $100 a year. And then they'd ask, wait, why are we paying $20,000? In fact, they never asked that question. Eventually, the medication did reach those people for $100 a year. In fact, of course, free at the point of delivery, but somebody paid $100 a year, let's say, either international foundations, international organizations, etc. The patient doesn't pay, of course. They get, for them, $100 a year is also as unpayable as $100,000 a year. But, in terms of the Western patients, they never asked the question, ultimately. So the whole thing was completely for nothing. All those people died for nothing whatsoever. There was no, not even a commercial gain to be made by the drug companies. And the only reason they essentially allowed that to happen eventually is because they were taking a PR hit. It started to look bad, and then the whole framework of their profit machine comes into question, and that is that's a much bigger pie. That's a much bigger story for them. That's an existential threat for them. So they had to make sure that story went away to the degree possible, and they were very successful in that. In fact, Fire in the Blood, in a way, starts to uncover some things that were very successfully swept under the rug, and stories that were erased from history for the large degree, because there are a lot of people with a considerable amount of blood on their hands who would have rather changed that narrative post factum. And I'm not just talking about drug companies, even AIDS activists, etc. Many people just didn't think it was important that massive numbers of people in Africa were dying. They just didn't feel that affected them, and it wasn't part of their agenda. Later on, they sort of adopted that. They added that to their banner, but at the time there were very few. And I think that the people we highlight in the film, it's hard to overstate the degree to which they were so few of them that were really sort of relentlessly, trying to solve this problem.
Vibha, your film ran on two parallel tracks. One was about female feticide, and one was about gang rape and working against the system, which was a very powerful system of Khaps, high caste farmers and high caste Haryanvis versus the small ordinary people. Both of them are interconnected because the common factor is human rights in Haryana, be it rights of a fetus, be it rights of a girl child, be it rights of someone who's been gang raped. So obviously it is so evident when we see your film, and so evident when we read the newspapers, that somewhere Haryana has to up its ante on human rights. But you merge these two things very, very seamlessly, and you came up with a great situation where you said that even the Khaps are now saying that female feticide is wrong, it is illegal, it is immoral, etc., 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 etc. But in Haryana, it is very clear. If your son has sex, mard ka putra. If your daughter has sex, she's a whore killer. That's never going to go away until the educated people start educating their children about sex education. However, and this is very pertinent in South Africa and it's very pertinent in Haryana, the educated are using their education as a power to stamp down on the uneducated. And I noticed that one clear factor in both the films. The educated were not allowing the uneducated to even get a chance at the medicine, at a thought, at having a voice. They were being subjugated at every single stage. So the subjugation, they can give as many speeches as they want, and they can have as many conferences as they want, and we can have as many United Nations issuing statements. But finally, when the educated are going to subjugate the uneducated, and this burning discrimination is finally destroying our earth, how do we raise the ante? How do we raise our voices even more? What is it, the one thing that you would like to do, both of you individually? First, Vibha.
So, Vivek, I'm glad you brought this up because I think the biggest learning that both the team and I had during the filming of Sunrise is, it is not just a Haryana situation.
Yes.
This bias that we have is across India. And I would go to the extent by saying this is not even an India story. This is a global reality. These biases are there everywhere. The packaging is different. And what I realized with, then it really comes down to educated versus uneducated. The packaging is different. But let me tell you, the conversations were the same. As far as when it came to, the rules for the son versus the daughter, the preference for the son versus the daughter, what the son is entitled to and what the daughter is not. These conversations were the same everywhere. Today, whether we are talking in Mumbai, we're talking in New York, we're talking in a village in Haryana, the bias exists. But what was very important is that whenever we're talking about women's issue or we're talking about a rape or a violence, we don't have men part of this conversation. So even when you read the headlines, you say, 20 women were raped in so-and-so place. By who? That's never mentioned. Or so many women were stalked in this, by who? So men are never part of this conversation. And this is what we said, that this passive tone needs to change. And it is imperative that we make men a part of this conversation, because when we talk about biases, when we talk about violence, this is not a women's issue, it's a human rights violation. And that is why the entire focus is that we've had, I think it's the few gender rights film which has only men in it, and that too from one of the most patriarchal states. And I think with the tone that we took was hopeful, because I decided to focus on those who are making the change happen, because I hope I have left the viewers with that resolve that this fight can be won. And I think hope is a huge aspect of it. Even sometimes the grip may get very fragile, but I think it's something that we need to cling on to, because without hope, no fight can be won. And this is a fight that we cannot afford to lose. So really, it's about making men a part of this. And I hope every man who has watched Sunrise goes back with the feeling that saying, I will be that champion. That is what we want. It's not about isolating. And, Dylan, you've seen it with films. You all are veterans in the industry. It's very easy to sensationalize, but very hard to sensitize. This film out of Haryana could have been a very different film where we could have just focused on the men's misdoings, but I think it would have done very little to affect change. Instead, we focused on our heroes.
Yeah,
Really?
It's interesting. When I started the process of making Fire in the Blood, I totally agree with what Vibha was saying there. And hope is an essential thing, not just because it's depressing to just hear about terrible things and you feel powerless, but it's also very important to show people who have just refused to just accept the status quo. It's very, because that, you're also challenging your audience to say, don't just sit there and say the world's a terrible place. Because these people are doing something about it. That for me, that was a very strong thing in both of these films, from Durban to Tomorrow and Fire in the Blood. We're showing people that actually have put their money where their mouth is, and they're going out there, in many cases, at great personal cost to themselves, both in terms of danger to themselves, like your characters, or just giving up their livelihood, or, being isolated from their family, from their community, from their society. They've done it because they feel it's the right thing to do. They think it's an important principle at stake, and they see people being mistreated and being abused and being marginalized, and in some cases slaughtered even. And they said, I'm not going to stand for that. I'm going to actually, and some of those people are not affected by these problems whatsoever. They've chosen to put themselves in that place. And I think that's extremely important, because then the audience is like, they don't have the excuse to say,
it's too big, it's too, the forces are arrayed against them. There's no hope for any of this. You actually have to say, well, you can do something. You don't have to do what these people are doing. Do 1% of what they're doing. Do 0.1% of what they're doing. Even that would be a lot. Help one person. So
Absolutely.
I think that's something we have, and that is the power of documentary, because you put that in a movie, then the string orchestra swells and everything. You got all that, but ultimately, when you see real people doing it, who are just like us, it's very, very powerful.
No, it's so true. And sorry, Vivek. Vivek, I want to tell you something. What happened with the cup leader? So in Sunrise, we have the biggest cup leader of the country in it, and the film starts where he's the first man that I met, and he looked at me and he said, "There is no place for women here." That same cup leader today is screening Sunrise across thousands of villages in Haryana. And this has been at the cost of his own popularity, where, people were, he was threatened, he was humiliated. A lot of people said he's not worthy of being the patriarch. But like Dylan said, they have been able to challenge the status quo. And he knew that, and I don't think he realized that his biggest fight would be with the other men. He just was not expecting this, but they're doing it. And he's powerful, yet he was willing to give that all up. And then you have an ordinary person who is being constantly, threatened and harassed, and his life is at stake. And yet he's saying, this is the right thing to do. And what Dylan was saying, this can only happen, that kind of impact can only happen in a documentary where there is no script. So the impact is just on a different level.
Vivek, I want to interrupt and just have you kind of wrap up this incredible conversation. I know this is so enthralling, but we've got to be cognizant of everyone's time. So Vivek, I'll have you just kind of take us out from this.
I just wanted to add one point. The moment you make it film, it becomes fiction. The hero is the hero and he's not you, and the heroine is the heroine. But last words, one thing that you would like to tell this audience, Vibha and Dylan, it has nothing to do with your film, it has nothing to do with the festival, but the one thing straight from your heart that you would like to tell our audience. 1 minute to you, Vibha, and then Dylan, and then we'll wrap up. Thank you for this extraordinary conversation.
Dylan, this time you go first.
All right.
Well, I think just to pick up the thread that we've all been sort of batting back and forth. I think probably a lot of young people in the audience, some of whom are students, some of whom are starting out on their career journeys. I do think one thing that is really important that I keep coming back to, is the idea of community in the larger sense. And society is a community. We're a world community. We have responsibility as individuals. And a lot of times people are waiting for other people to do things. They're waiting for the government to do things. They're waiting for the opposition to do things. They're waiting for business to do things, what have you. We all have personal responsibility. And if you want to live in a democracy, you have to make it a democracy. You have to fight for it. You have to fight for people's rights, and always look down at who are the people who are really struggling. I tell my son this. My son's a little kid. He's 12. Every day I tell him, look out for that kid who's suffering in your class. Be a friend to that kid. It doesn't cost you anything. Be the better person. There's lots of examples of it, but it's frustrating with all the things that are going on in society. For example, we see these farmers out there in many ways risking their lives to express something that is of existential importance to them. Let's just listen to them. It doesn't mean you have to agree with them. You don't have to agree with every single person that takes to the streets, but empathy is extremely important. And all of us have a role to play. None of us can sit on the sidelines. I honestly believe that. Now, if you've been given the privilege of having an education and having a place to live and having food on your plate, then you owe it to everybody around you to be a force for good, and to make sure that those who don't have that voice are amplified and listened to at least. So that's my message, I guess. I would give to especially to the young people who are out there.
That's beautiful, Dylan. And really, that's what we strive for. In documentary filmmaking, sometimes the journey gets really rough. And many times I have wanted to give up. It's gotten very hard to tell the story. But my husband, I know there was a case where in Daughters of Mother India, I had a 5-year-old who was gang raped. And when I saw the bloodied body and when we took her to the hospital and when her x-ray was done and they found candles and bottles inside her, I didn't want to tell the story. And my husband said, you cannot unsee what you've seen. And the only closure you can get is once the film is complete and a life is changed. And this is what we strive for.
Thank you. I wish we had more time, but thank you very much, Vibha. Thank you, Dylan. It's been a great pleasure talking to the both of you. Thank you for your compassion. Thank you for making me feel good. Until last week, I was feeling very, very low because of what's been happening in the country. And I'm not understanding why ordinary, normal people cannot understand it, who are in fact actually pro the evil that we are. But I'm feeling good now. And on behalf of the iView Human Rights Film Festival, on behalf of all the organizers and sponsors of this film festival, thank you, Vibha. Thank you, Dylan. Thank you, everyone. God bless.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
All the best.
Thanks,
Good to
guys.
see you all.
That's a wrap. Wonderful, wonderful. Wow, what a great conversation. I'm like, whew, that was great. Thank you both so much. Viveck, thanks for being an amazing moderator as always. And guys, please help us spread the word about your screening, about the festival, about the films. You know, we have some incredible programming, and I really hope that you're going to actually take some time to watch some of it because a lot of it is virtual. So, yeah.
Awesome. Thank
All
you
right.
so much, guys. So good to see all of you again.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Travels to
Bye.
everyone. And have a great,
Thank you, Vivek.
happy
Bye,
holidays.
Dylan.
Happy New Year, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.